Greetings, this is Reverend Yue McCormick of True Vow Temple. In this presentation, I will review the Middle Way, the Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path as taught by Shakyamuni Buddha. I hope to clarify how we can use these teachings as a tool to reflect on the progress of our practice. The Wheel of the Dharma in Buddhism means the teaching that the Buddha expounded to free all of life from the effects of suffering. In his first discourse, the Buddha taught the Middle Way and the Four Noble Truths that are the foundations of Buddha Dharma. He expounded this discourse to 5 ascetics who were his former companions during his own ascetic phase of practice. They became the first 5 Buddhist monks and the nucleus of the Sangha. Soon after, those who became the Buddha's followers would take refuge in the 3 treasures, consisting of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the teacher, the teaching, and the community that upholds and follows the teaching. From the very beginning of Buddhism, taking refuge in the 3 treasures was the way to express one's sincere commitment to follow the Buddha Dharma. All schools of Buddhism recognize their validity and importance. The Buddha began his first discourse by revealing the middle way between self-indulgence and self-denial. The ideal of the middle way is to live a life of harmony and equilibrium by escaping excessive self-involvement. To live in accord with the middle way, the Buddha taught that we must follow the Eightfold Noble Path. This path is also the 4th of the Four Noble Truths, which the Buddha explains after discussing the middle way. Here is what the Buddha said about the middle way. Monks, these 2 extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness. What 2? The pursuit of sensual happiness and sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, ignoble, unbeneficial. And the pursuit of self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, unbeneficial. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, which leads to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nirvana. In short, the Buddha defined the middle way as the way between attachment and aversion, self-indulgence and self-denial. The Buddha then defined the middle way as the Eightfold Noble Path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. After teaching the middle way, the Buddha proceeded to teach the Four Noble Truths. These 4 are the truth of suffering, the truth of the origin of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering, which is the Eightfold Noble Path. Later on, in his initial discourse, the Buddha clarified that suffering is to be understood, the origin of suffering is to be abandoned, the cessation of suffering is to be realized, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering is to be cultivated. The Four Noble Truths are not meant to be a creed that one should believe in. It is a program to be worked through. Another way of looking at this is that if the Buddha is a doctor of the mind and spirit, the first noble truth is his observation of the symptoms. The second noble truth is his diagnosis of the underlying problem. The third noble truth is his prognosis, and the 4th noble truth is his prescription or treatment plan. The Buddha then explained the first noble truth as follows. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, union with what is displeasing is suffering, separation from what is pleasing is suffering, not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. I want to note that the Sanskrit word dukkha, translated as suffering, could just as easily be translated as displeasure or unsatisfactoriness. It indicates a whole range of feelings from the subtle vulnerability and uneasiness of simply being alive to the outright suffering of mortality. This is not a wholesale condemnation of life, but simply a critical evaluation of life's unsettling and unstable nature. Is there anyone who can honestly claim that life is totally blissful and free of trouble, pain, and disappointment? I also want to make clear that in this initial discourse, the Buddha is really only talking about the perspective of life within the 6 paths, or 6 lower realms of transmigration. I would like to clarify what the Buddha means here by saying that, in brief, suffering is the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. What the Buddha is referring to are the 5 aggregates or components of a sentient being: form, feeling, the ability to feel whether sensations are pleasant, unpleasant, or neither; perception, the ability to perceive or recognize the source of what one is sensing and feeling; mental formations, cognitive functions and emotional reactions to what one is perceiving; and consciousness, the conscious awareness of the experience of sensing, feeling, perceiving, and having thoughts and reactions to it. In other discourses, the Buddha points out that when one looks for a self, one cannot find anything apart from these 5, and that each of these 5 is impermanent, incapable of providing unconditional satisfaction or happiness, and so leading to suffering if we can cling to them as if they can, and ultimately, none of them are the basis for a stable, permanent, and happy self. When the Buddha awakened, he ceased to identify himself with or cling to these 5 aggregates, recognizing that they were impermanent, unsatisfactory, did not have the nature of a self, and were ultimately empty. The Buddha then explained the second noble truth of the origin of suffering as follows. It is this craving which leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there, that is, craving for sensual pleasure, craving for existence, and craving for extermination. In other words, sentient beings seek unconditional happiness from the conditioned phenomena of the 6 lower realms. Furthermore, they seek to perpetuate their existence within the 6 lower realms, believing they can get to the heavenly realms, or at least the human realm, and stay there, not recognizing that, as long as one stays within the 6 realms, one is liable to eventually end up in the lower realms. This is because the effects of one's good causes are impermanent. Also, those who reach the higher realms tend to become complacent or forgetful. Also, past bad causes that were forgotten eventually come to fruition when the effects of good causes finally come to an end. It may seem surprising that the Buddha lists craving for extermination as an origin of suffering. Isn't nirvana, as understood in the pre-Mahayana teachings, a form of extermination? So wouldn't aspiring to attain nirvana be the same as craving for extermination or the cessation of existence? I believe that this is a misunderstanding, but I will address it after we examine the third noble truth. The Buddha then explained the third noble truth of the cessation of suffering as follows. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, and freedom from it, non-reliance on it. Notice that the third noble truth of cessation is not the cessation of a self, but the cessation of craving. Again, the Buddha is talking about getting rid of or resolving attachment and aversion, and ultimately ignorance, and not about getting rid of oneself or the world. Let's again consider the craving for extermination as an origin of suffering. In China, the nirvana of the so-called Hinayana is called reducing the body to ashes and annihilating consciousness. This, however, is a misunderstanding. Many times the Buddha clarified that it was not the self he was trying to annihilate, but the 3 poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. There is no self to annihilate. There is only the ignorant perception of an isolated, unchanging self that needs to be seen through. Craving for extermination as an origin of suffering is not the same as aspiring to nirvana, the extinction of greed, hatred, and ignorance. Craving for extermination is a suicidal and nihilistic aversion to life itself. According to the Buddha, such aversion or hatred perpetuates rebirth, because these are mental causes that bind one even more to self-absorption and negative states of mind that will come to fruition in lower realms. The point is that, according to the Buddha, not just attachment but also aversion is a cause that will bind one to the object of one's attachment or aversion. If one wants freedom from objects of attachment or aversion, including the object of one's perception of a self, one must resolve the attachments and aversions through mindfulness and empathy. From the perspective of the Lotus Sutra and the Nirvana Sutra, everyone will attain Buddhahood, and Buddhas are not annihilated upon death. They do not view life as something in which there is a self that is born or dies, that appears or disappears. This is clarified in Chapter 16 of the Lotus Sutra, which is why we recite that chapter as part of our daily practice in Nichiren Buddhism. The Nirvana Sutra states that, unlike the conditioned phenomena of the lower six realms, which are characterized by impurity, suffering, impermanence, and non-self, the unconditioned true reality of all things is pure, blissful, eternal, and the basis of a universal self. Those in the Four Noble States or Four Higher Realms come to realize the unconditioned true reality, though it is only those who attain Buddhahood who realize it completely. The Buddha then explained the fourth noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering as follows. It is this eightfold noble path, that is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The Eightfold Noble Path is described in more detail by the Buddha in other discourses. I will now go on to share with you his precise definition of each of these. Right view, according to the Buddha, is knowledge of suffering, knowledge of the origin of suffering, knowledge of the cessation of suffering, and knowledge of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Basically, it is to have direct, first-hand knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. Right intention, according to the Buddha, is intention of renunciation, intention of non-ill will, and intention of harmlessness. More positively put, right intention is to be generous, patient, compassionate, and to renounce violence and clinging to the conditioned phenomena of the six lower realms. Right speech, according to the Buddha, is abstinence from false speech, abstinence from divisive speech, abstinence from harsh speech, and abstinence from idle chatter. I don't think this needs much clarification. Right action, according to the Buddha, is abstinence from the destruction of life, abstinence from taking what is not given, and abstinence from sexual misconduct. Obviously, this means not to harm others or take what does not belong to you. But what exactly is meant by sexual misconduct? In another discourse, the Buddha said, "He misconducts himself in sensual pleasures. He has intercourse with women who are protected by their mother and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who have a husband, who are protected by law, and even with those who are garlanded in token of betrothal." In terms of a patriarchal culture, it seems that what is meant is that one should not have sexual relations with women who belong to other men. Applied to women, I am sure it meant that they are not to have relations with anyone but their husband. However, I am going to take this to mean do not have sexual relations with minors, with those who have not given their consent, and not to engage in sexual relations that would involve infidelity or dishonesty on anyone's part, or that would put someone at risk for disease or unwanted pregnancy. The bottom line is, don't harm others or oneself physically or emotionally, or their relationships, or put anyone else at risk of harm. Right livelihood, according to the Buddha, is, here a noble disciple, having abandoned a wrong mode of livelihood, earns his living by a right livelihood. I must admit this is too general. In another discourse, the Buddha specifies that wrong livelihood for monastics is to get alms by scheming, talking, hinting, belittling, pursuing gain with gain, whereas wrong livelihood for lay followers is to traffic in weapons, living beings, meat, intoxicants, and poisons. In other words, if you are a monk or nun, don't scheme and constantly try to talk people into making donations as if the Dharma were a business. If you are a layperson, don't engage in businesses that harm or exploit others. Nichiren was of course very concerned for those such as fishermen and samurai whose jobs or duties involve killing. He believed that the Odaimoku could function as a form of repentance for those who were unavoidably engaged in such activities. But this does not mean that we should not reflect upon the nature of our work and endeavor to find work that is wholesome for ourselves and others, while also fulfilling our duties and responsibilities. Right effort, according to the Buddha, is a practitioner generates a desire for the non-arising of unarisen, evil, unwholesome states, for the abandoning of arisen, evil, unwholesome states, for the arising of unarisen, wholesome states, and for the maintenance of arisen, wholesome states. In each of these 4 cases, he makes an effort, arouses energy, applies his mind, and strives. This is about cultivating good habits and curbing bad habits. I believe this is pretty straightforward. I will admit to modifying the Buddha's words here slightly to simplify the language and direct them specifically to practitioners rather than just monks as in the original. Right mindfulness, according to the Buddha, is a practitioner dwells contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure in regard to the world. He does the same regarding feelings, mental states, and phenomena. Again, I have simplified the language a bit. One should be dispassionately mindful of and look into the present reality of bodily states, passing feelings, mental states, and phenomena generally to see for oneself their true nature. In Tiantai's teaching, one can initially see that bodily states are impure, feelings are ultimately unsatisfactory, mental states are impermanent, and phenomena do not have a self-nature. Then one will observe that each of the 4 are impure, unsatisfactory, impermanent, and without a self-nature. By doing this, one becomes free of one's delusions regarding the body, feelings, mental states, and conditioned phenomena generally. Before I get into the Buddha's explanation of right concentration, I want to explain some of the terms used here. Concentration is a translation of the Sanskrit word samadhi, while meditative absorption is a translation of jhana, which in China was called chana, and then simply chan, and in Japan was pronounced zen. The meditative absorptions are deepening states of mental concentration as one refines one's mindfulness of an object of meditation. Thought refers to the mental act of thinking of something. Examination refers to the mental act of thinking about something. It is a deeper scrutiny of what you have brought to mind by thinking of it. One-pointedness is to be mindful of just one thing. Happiness, in this case, refers to a tranquil, blissful feeling, while rapture is a less stable and more energetic feeling. As the Buddha describes each of these meditative absorptions, you will see that each row of the table shows which mental factors are present in each one, beginning with the first and going down to the 4th. Right concentration, according to the Buddha, is, here, practitioners, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. A practitioner enters and dwells in the first meditative absorption, which is accompanied by thought and examination, with rapture and happiness born of seclusion. With the subsiding of thought and examination, he enters and dwells in the second meditative absorption, which has internal confidence and unification of mind, is without thought and examination, and has rapture and happiness born of concentration. With the fading away as well of rapture, he dwells equanimous and mindful and clearly comprehending. He experiences happiness with the body. He enters and dwells in the third meditative absorption, of which the noble ones declare he is equanimous, mindful, one who dwells happily. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous passing away of joy and displeasure, he enters and dwells in the fourth meditative absorption, which is neither painful nor pleasant, and includes purification of mindfulness by equanimity. Here the Buddha does not describe the 5 hindrances to the practice of meditative absorption. In other talks, these are described as sensual desire, restlessness and remorse, ill will, dullness and drowsiness, and doubt. These are countered respectively by the mental factors in the column below each of them. It might be wondered why one would want to cultivate the meditative absorptions that leave behind rapture and happiness. The reason is that these are considered mental factors that get in the way of the total peace and clarity that is needed to see things as they truly are. While one could gain liberating insight even in the first meditative absorption, while thinking of and about the Buddha's teachings, and temporarily having overcome the 5 hindrances, it is the fourth meditative absorption, with its one-pointedness and mindfulness purified by equanimity, that is considered optimal for attaining insight. We must keep in mind that these meditative states are about the shamatha, or calming method of Buddha's practice. By themselves, they cannot bring about liberation. These states are used to calm, clear, and focus the mind so that one can accomplish the vipassana, or insight method of Buddhist practice. Only when one has true insight or wisdom can there be true liberation from suffering. Therefore, the role of right concentration is to enable the practitioner to have right view. I hope that one can relate to this as one chants Odaimoku. If one can be mindful of the Odaimoku as one chants it with a one-pointed or single-minded regard, one should be able to enter a feeling of calm relaxation, leading to happiness, and even a rapturous sense of satisfaction. That is the first meditative absorption. At a certain point, one will no longer need to self-consciously think of or about the Odaimoku, or any of the things one is chanting for or about. One simply chants. That is the second meditative absorption. Then one's happiness becomes more stable as one begins to attain equanimity or peace of mind. That is the third meditative absorption. Finally, there is only one-pointed attention and equanimity as one simply chants the Odaimoku to the point of feeling that one is the Odaimoku. That is the fourth meditative absorption. I want to point out that in Nichiren Buddhism, the Eightfold Noble Path can be viewed as a generalized description of good causes to make and bad causes to refrain from, and of how disciples of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas will live their lives in this world. When we chant the Odaimoku, the primary benefit of our practice is that we will find ourselves more naturally able to conform to such a life. However, though we may use the Eightfold Noble Path as a way to gauge our spiritual maturity and reflect upon the nature of our causes, it is our Odaimoku practice that we rely upon to attain Buddhahood. We should never get discouraged by our inability to instantly conform to the Eightfold Noble Path, nor should we be neglectful of it. What we should do is realize that the Odaimoku empowers us to follow the Eightfold Noble Path, and that the Eightfold Noble Path provides us with practical advice for cultivating the spirit of the Lotus Sutra in our daily lives. I now bring this talk to a close. I look forward to your questions and comments. May the merits of this talk on the Dharma extend universally to all, so that we and all living beings together accomplish the Buddha way.